And I said, "You're a spy, aren't you?" And he laughed at me. And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool."
Wow.
So he was paid by the Japanese to spy on me for 2 years.
This week, are the legends of Japanese gymnastics spies real? Find out today in our interview with a British gymnast and legend, Sam Oldham. Today is May 18th, 2026. Oof. And welcome to GymCastic's #1 gymnastics podcast in the galaxy. I'm Jessica, and I'm here with Spencer from the Balance Beam Situation. If you are a Club Gym Nerd member, you can listen to the extended version of this week's episode, the interview. It'll either be in your behind the scenes feed, instructions on how to do that in the show notes, or you can log in to this show page at gymcastic.com and find it there. Sam Oldham has been using storytelling as a method of and changing the culture of gymnastics. Check out his YouTube channel.
British gymnastics icon Sam Oldham is here, and we're going to talk about, and by we, I mean Jessica and Sam, are going to talk about everything from winning Olympic bronze for Team GB in the London 2012 era that changed British gymnastics forever, to the chaos, comedy, travails of elite life behind the scenes. Jessica and Sam get into honesty about elite life, and most importantly, Japanese gymnastics spies. So listen now.
I don't know whether you know this about the Japanese. The Japanese are fascinating when it comes to gymnastics. They send spies all over the world. And I one of these spies used to watch me every day. So he got sent to Loughborough University, and the biomechanics lab was above the gym. And he just used to feed the information back to Japan of what I was doing. So he was paid by the Japanese to spy on me for 2 years. That's unbelievable, isn't it? And when I went to Ireland 2 summers ago, I turned up to my best friend's gym, and there was a Japanese coach there. And I was like, this is strange. This is like, it's a club gym, and there's some good boys, but not like super high level. And this guy is just like dedicating his time. And I was helping a girl do a front half twist, and he came up to me and he wrote down on a big piece of paper. He drew pictures of why I was teaching. He was like, "This is Russian technique, and this is why it's wrong. This is Japanese technique. This is how we teach this." And I was like, "Who is this guy?" And I found out that he had coached 2 Olympic teams, Japanese men's Olympic teams. And I said, "You're a spy, aren't you?" And he laughed at me. And he said, "Yeah." And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing. That's so
Wow.
cool." So whenever you see a Japanese coach somewhere, it's normally sending information back. And when I went to train in Japan for 2 weeks with Sergei, and we traveled around a couple of universities, and we trained at the National Center. Now, only the juniors were training there that week, and I trained alongside them. And on the last day, the man that ran that center said, "Sam, come into my office." So I walked into his office, and he said, "I want to show you the beautiful view of Mount Fuji outside my office." And so I saw Mount Fuji out of his office, and it was beautiful. And there were 2 guys with headphones in, with their heads down on computers, and they recorded all of the training that I did, and they were just analyzing it. And I was like, "Oh, I've just paid so you can take all of the footage, my footage." And when you get onto the Japanese team, when you're a junior, you and your coach get access to a database, and you just type any gymnast name in the world in, and it comes up with all the footage they've got from them. And when we were starting to do well in Great Britain, the Japanese started to want to do training camps with us. And the rule was they could record us, but we weren't allowed to record them. And I remember saying to Eddie Van Hoof, "This is crazy. Why are we agreeing to this? And why can't we film them?" And he was like, "This is Japan. This is an honor that they want to train with us." And I was like, "Yeah, but they're taking all of our secrets." Like, it was brilliant. And we were only allowed to ever train with their juniors. We were not allowed to train with their seniors. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, fascinating, isn't it?
So there was always this like major drama here in the US because there was the parent of a gymnast who was also a gold medalist from China. Her mom was coaching her at national team camp. She was alternate for the London team. The first woman to compete a Rybalka
On what?
on
Oh, okay, yeah.
yeah, like no women did it. And so she did it. And then they were like, "It doesn't finish in handstands, so we're not going to give credit." And she was like, "The men get credit." But anyway, so good on bars. So her mom's there coaching her. She's on the national team. She makes the training squad. She ends up as alternate. Before that, the 2008 quad, her dad was there coaching her before the Beijing Olympics. And Nastia and her dad, Valery, were always like, this is totally unfair. He shouldn't be here because he is giving secrets to the Chinese team because he's like the Chinese head coach or whatever. He was like a consultant for them. And they were like, that's not fair because they're going to tell everybody our start values and then they're going to change their routines. And my contention of this is like, anyone can tell any other country. You have all these Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian coaches here. You don't think they're not telling all their friends what you guys are doing? It's the Chinese that are the problem. Everyone's doing this. But also I was like, either you can do a fucking 6.0 value bar routine or you can't.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to change, like, you're already going to try to do the hardest. And maybe you add something because you need it. But like, how much, my question is, how much effect do you think? How much damage do you think that kind of spying does? Because honestly, I'm just like,
it definitely,
it's
if it was
Japan.
strategy, right? Like
Yeah.
strategically, if the team was, if you were trying to weigh up what British team is going to get selected, what team are they going to pick? Because we need to go up against them. We need to pick a team that's maybe built to beat that type of a team. Yeah, maybe. I mean, my thought process is let everybody see everything. I'm going to try and beat you anyway. But what I would do, so on a personal level, at the start of every year, I'd work out what everyone else's start values were probably going to be because I knew their gymnastics. And if I was learning a skill that I felt like that gymnast is more physically, genetically suited to that skill, I'm not going to do it at this camp because I might give them the idea to go home and try it somewhere in their subconscious. So I'd stop it and I'd leave it back. I think it's more of that kind of thing. Like if a country finds a skill or a cheat code in the code and they're all doing it, they feed that back, then that passes to everybody. Like it's more of that maybe, but I don't know. I'm sure they wouldn't do it if there wasn't a huge benefit to it, would they? They wouldn't do it.
I mean,
learning new skills or new families of skills, that might be the first time you're doing it. So you want to learn the preps and the technique that they're doing. There's got to be value in that information of passing it back. Yeah.
And I hear that. Like it is also like I think that your job as like a federation and as a head coach, like if I'm in charge of British Gymnastics, like my job, well not British Gymnastics, but like the men's program, my job is to leave nothing to chance. So I want to know everyone's start values in the whole world, what everyone's doing. Like I want to make sure everyone's prepared. I know there's no surprises and there's no one doing something where I'm like, oh shit, I never thought about that connection.
Yeah,
and that makes sense.
That's just the art of war. That for me, that's more like strategy. That's more going for it.
One thing I have wanted to ask you, which I found so interesting about, like sometimes I like that you just do like a monologue and you talk about a topic and do your storytelling. And one of the stories you told was about your coach telling you to watch an athlete and watch how this athlete went to each judge and said hello and made a point. I'm sure I know who this is, and made a point of being friendly and making sure that the judges and the administrators had a positive association with him. Even if the judges didn't have a bias towards him, they could have an implicit bias because they had a positive association with him. And I was like, this is the kind of thing that I don't hear happening in women's gymnastics necessarily. Can you tell me more about that? And was there other times your coach did that? And were there other strategy sort of sessions? I think of that as a strategy session, and a lesson in human nature as well.
Yeah.
Were there other times? Tell me about your coach and why he did that.
Well, Sergei was just trying to teach me about the sport. Look, he came from a world where it was dog eat dog. Like my coach Sergei came from communist Russia, where him and his friends in the gym, they would stand at the side of a road and wait for the potato trucks to go through the village, and they'd fight to get the potatoes because they were starving. And years later now, Sergei's now in his 60s. And if you go to a national training camp with him, I didn't know this until years and years later, until another Russian coach told me this, but you would see them pile their plate this high. I always thought it was strange. I was like, how do they eat so much? But it's because they never used to know when their last meal would be or how long it would be until they get the next one. So they were taught to eat as much as you can, you know? And so that was really interesting. And that influenced a lot of the kind of approach to gymnastics that Sergei had. So at times it would seem quite harsh, but if you grew up in that environment, you completely understand it with context. And so Sergei would tell me these stories. He used to tell me about at national training camps in Russia, when the USSR was the USSR and they used to win everything and they were the best in the world, and Leonid Arkayev was their head coach. The senior gymnast, the older gymnast, if a new young gymnast came onto the scene and he had a lot of talent, let's say he was maybe 16, they'd invite him to their room, they'd get him drunk and say, hey, you're our best friend now. And then they'd leave him drunk outside of Arkayev's room, knock on the door and walk away, and they'd never see that guy again. But that's how ruthless it was. And so that approach for Sergei, he would tell me all about this, how some athletes go up to the judges and they make friends with them. And I don't mind telling you the athlete. The athlete was Oleg Vanayev. He was brilliant at it. And what he would do is he would go to all the judges and he wouldn't just say, he wouldn't just be friends with them and shake their hands. He'd say, what do you think to my routine? Can you give me some feedback? And what that's doing psychologically is going, if me as a judge, you go, me, Oleg Vanayev, you want my input. And if he goes, well, maybe you should think about this. And Oleg goes, that's a great idea. I'm going to try and train that. Maybe watch my next one. Then all of a sudden that judge is invested in your journey. And if you win an Olympic medal, they feel part of the gang. And so it was such a clever thing that he was doing, Oleg. And he would always do that. He'd go up. He was friends with all of the judges from everywhere. And there is this game that gets played behind closed doors, which is really interesting. And you'd hear that when I was younger. You'd hear people saying, oh, you need the judges on your side, and it's going to take a while, you know. I remember after the 2011 European Championships in Berlin, I went there and made my senior debut at 18, and I qualified for the high bar final. And I was in the high bar final with Epke Zonderland, Philip Boy, Marcel Nguyen, and I did a beautiful routine. I split my legs on my tack half to handstand, but other than that, I even stuck my dismount with my legs together. And it was really nice. And I finished fourth in that final. And at the banquet afterwards, the British judge, Andy Toombs, who's now Andy Toombs at the FIG, he came up to me and said,
he's the men's technical committee head
Sam,
now, right?
That was such a beautiful routine. You should have won the bronze medal. And I was like, well, why didn't you give it me? Why didn't I get it then? You know? But at the time, the competition was being held in Germany, and, you know, that's the way. I didn't have a name yet. I had to build that name. So the sport really does work that way behind closed doors, because at the end of the day, it's a subjective sport, right? Like, I can decide whether I think, well, that was a 1, or maybe it was a 3, or yeah, it's pretty clean. Like, it's just not as black and white as you would like it to be as an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I contend that it is objective.
It should be.
Right. It should, like, if the judges do their jobs, there should be no range. It is or it isn't. And I think, like, the behind the scenes, the judges, like the new administration kind of has, well, not, I would say, you know, the FIG hiring Hughes Mercier, Dr. Hughes Mercier, to like change, how do we make sure that people can't cheat? How do we do a study and make sure the judges are on it? And like one of the first things they did was eliminate that, like maybe a range of deductions, no ranges. Like it's either 3/10 or it's nothing. You did it or you didn't. But I totally get what you're saying. And I feel like that message from your coach of make sure people have a positive association with you, because no matter what the code says, judges are still human beings. And it is such a good lesson in life too, that don't burn bridges, and everything you do is watched. Everything you do has a consequence. You have a choice. And to build positive relationships with people is a bonus to you in your life, in your after gymnastics life, if you go on to business or whatever, like your dad did. Like, he had to build relationships so to help get sponsors for you, because no one can afford gymnastics unless you are independently wealthy. It's not possible. Elite gymnastics. Yeah. So I just thought that was so interesting. We had a live show at NCAA Championships with the great Chae Campbell, dancer, UCLA legend. Has a meme. She is a model for Athleta. She's dancing in a video near you at some time or in a commercial. It was an amazing show. And you can still buy replay tickets to watch that show. Spencer, what else can people look forward to if they're a Club Gym Nerd member?
You get a weekly other podcast. Every Friday at noon Pacific, we do behind the scenes. And if you find yourself listening to this show and responding to us when we say things about like who was the best, actually the best on floor at a various competition, behind the scenes is your chance to actually do that in real time, because you can chat with us as we're talking. $5.99 a month at gymcastic.com. If you're not already a member, you should do it.
Club Gym Nerd makes a great gift. And you can also get like a mini commission. We have merch too, and you can gear up for elite season. Also, we're having a refer a friend program, but free for a month. Email us, tell us who you're referring. And pointed toes is not a suggestion. That's our other shirt coming up. Gymcastic@gmail.com if you want to refer a friend for a free month. What other things did he teach you that you take with you now?
Oh, wow. I mean, I often describe my coach Sergei as a mixture between Rafiki out of The Lion King and Master Yoda out of Star Wars, because he talks in riddles. But the one thing I've realized as I've gotten older is that he's always right. And sometimes we would butt heads hard and we'd go to war, me and Sergei. But years later, I would sit back and go, wow, he was right. And the great thing about my coach was that he always had my best interests at heart, and that isn't always the case. There was just to go off on somewhat of a tangent, I've seen two incredible things with my coach. One was years after he was a national coach, we went back to the National Centre in Lilleshall for the first time. And the last group of kids that he'd coach at junior level, because he was the head junior coach for Great Britain for a long time, they all just ignored the other coaches, went straight up to him. They were all hugging him. But the thing he did was that he would go around to their rooms at 10 o'clock before they were 18, and he'd knock on the door and make sure they were asleep. Now, at the time, they used to get so frustrated with him. They're like, I'm a man, leave me alone. Why you? But years later, they realized, oh, you cared. And the others didn't care. They let us do whatever we wanted. And that was a beautiful thing to see. And then a few years after that, I was in the gym and I was just rolling out on the vault run up. And Sergei was on the high bar pushing a pad in for somebody on the high bar who was learning a release and catch skill. And there were two little kids, and they were just recreational gymnasts, a little girl and a little boy, and they were stood next to each other. And the little girl looked up at him, and the boy said, "What's that man doing?" And the little girl said, "He can teach you how to fly. He's a wizard. I've seen him do it before." And it was like the best moment I'd ever seen in gymnastics. I was like, that's it. That's what it's about. And the great thing about Sergei was that, and Reese McClenaghan told me that very recently. He said, I always respected Sergei, but I respect him so much more now because having spent time with him training for the Irish Dancing with the Stars show, he said, I brought my partner to the gym and Sergei spent 4 hours trying to teach her how to do a no-handed cartwheel, and he just didn't lose any enthusiasm. And he coaches everybody that way. I used to joke that I'd be ready to do a bar routine with a casino in it, and he'd be off in the corner teaching a recreational kid to do a back roll. And I'd be having to call him over like, "Sir, I've got to do a bar routine." But he taught me so much about life, mainly the principles of life, exactly what you just spoke about, it's great that Oleg goes up to people and, he's trying to be friends with the judges, but it's more about respecting everybody. The great thing about sport, whether it's a gymnastics club or a football field, when you walk onto the pitch, or you go into the arena, all that matters is how good are you at it. I don't care where you came from. I don't care what your upbringing's been, what race you are, what religion. It does not matter. I just want to see beautiful gymnastics. And so that's the beauty of sport. And Sergei always taught me that about life. And I've carried that with me. And it's true what you say, I've seen a lot of athletes that on the way up, they've treated people not very well that have supported them, and those people will kick you twice as hard on the way back down, and you have to be very careful as an athlete because it's a very selfish pursuit. It's all about you. It's not about anybody else, and it has to be, and it's amazing, and that should be celebrated, the sacrifices that you make. But anybody that says they're completely self-made that's not true. It's impossible. You need a support network and people around you, and you have to treat people well because that will pay you off when you retire. I'm evidence of that. I used to be you've got to be ruthless to get to the top. In my experience, when I've spent time with the most successful people, they're the nicest. They're the friendliest. I spend time, we went and did a trip with Fabian Hambuchen, who was like my childhood hero when I was a kid. He could not give me more time. Whenever I share anything online, he's the first person to repost it. He doesn't need to do any of that. He's just the nicest guy in the world, and he's one of the best high bar workers of all time. So that for me was a lesson in making sure that you always treat people with respect and be kind to people, no matter what. Because I always say to kids that I work with, or high-level athletes, when you walk in the gym, there's two things you control: how hard you work and your attitude. That's it. Those two things. The amount of talent you've got, the facilities, your coaching, all of the other stuff, you can't control a lot of that, but you can control how hard you work and how you treat everybody else. So, Sergei taught me all of those life skills. He was an incredible human being.
Do you think the culture of British gymnastics and gymnastics in general has changed since you retired?
So that's an interesting question.
Either
the athletes
globally or UK.
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak for the UK. The athletes tell me yes, unanimously tell me yes. It's much better. It's changed. We get listened to. We have a voice now. There's a part of me that wonders whether a lot of it is because there are eyes fixated on watching and making sure that people aren't doing anything, and maybe certain coaches that would coach in a certain way might just be, they might know now, like, I can't coach that way, so I have to, make sure that I change my ways. And look, whatever the reasons for that, that's a good thing, right? We want kids to be coached in the right way, with the right approach. What's tricky, Jessica, about our sport, right, is it's unique in many ways, but how many sports are there where you have to support children? You have to. Don't necessarily. Okay, to do high-level gymnastics, it's going to be very, very hard not to support a young girl that's frightened to death to try a death for the first time on A-bars. Like, whatever that might be, there's going to have to be an element of the coach supporting the kids. So all of a sudden you've got that's a gray area already. That's a big red flag. And some parents are like, well, I just don't want to put my child in that situation with somebody that I don't know. So already you're in a minefield. For me, a lot of the issues are around policy with I brought this up in the Me Too stuff. I still don't understand why 15-year-old girls can be competing at the Olympic Games, because that is so much pressure on those young girls. When I was 15, I couldn't even get myself ready for school probably. I still needed my mum. My mum would put my uniform out and she'd get my lunch, she'd make my lunch for me. And then you're going to put 15-year-old kids in front of millions. That pressure is just so crazy. My granddad grew up in kind of an era of football. All my family are football players. And his kind of mantra was, if you're good enough, you're old enough. Right? Because back then, like, football players would typically be in their late 20s, early 30s, and he wanted to play in teams when they were kind of 16. He wanted to break into the senior team, and that is still commonplace in like sport in the UK now. I play football, and there are like 16-year-old lads that play with the men's team, which is kind of crazy, really, when you think, okay, there's like 16-year-old kids in a changing room with grown men who are in their 30s. That's like a really like strange dynamic. And being somebody that coaches little kids now, I look at that and go, that's quite peculiar there. So I think there are lots of things in the sport that are super complicated. But I do think that it is better. But I have to say, Jessica, like, I'm not convinced that in 5 more years' time we'll hear stuff about what's going on right now. And I think it falls upon people being very brave and principled and standing up when they see something that's wrong. The issue that you have a lot in gymnastics is that, a lot of the people that were at the top, and I'm talking about in the UK here, the most experienced coaches, when the young coach comes in, if they were to share their opinion, the attitude was always, well, you've got no medals. What are you talking about? And so they were like quietened it down very quick. So very quickly you kind of learn your place. And before you know it, if you're in that environment and you're in that environment 4 or 5 hours a day, you're in then, you're maybe not seeing what looks strange. I remember when I chatted to my mum and dad, and at the gym in Nottingham, a long, long time ago, it's very different now. I send my little boy to that gym, so that tells you what I think about the club and the culture. It's brilliant. But when I was a kid and I first joined that gym, there were 2 doors at the front and there were 2 little windows in them. And parents could look through, and a lot of the parents would sit in the waiting area and they could see the gym and with their eyes, but they still weren't seeing what was happening because it was there in their face. And I remember saying to my mum and dad when this was all happening, you know, I got put in a box once. Can you remember that? And they were like, what do you mean you got put in a box? I was like, yeah, I was put in a box. So here in the UK, it's quite common to have like old vault tables where there's sections to them. Basically the old vault from like, I don't know, maybe the 40s, 50s. And they'd take the lid off and I'd go in the lid because I was messing around. And they put the lid on and I thought it was funny because I was like, yeah, they're putting me in the box. Now I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And there used to be a thing called the splits machine. So there'd be 2 big wooden boxes, right? Probably about 1/2 meter high, 1/2 meter thick, solid wood. There was 2 of them. You'd sit in the middle in a japana, which is a straddle sit. 2 grown men would sit on each side, push with their legs until you're in splits. And I wasn't flexible, so for me that was horrendous. I hated that. And that kind of like world was very commonplace back then. It was everywhere. You know, I remember going to Ukraine when I was 13 and we got there a day early and we needed to do a training session and Sergei took us to a club gym. So we get to this club gym and we're warming up and we did our lines on the floor and there was a little boy training with his coach and he was maybe 8 years old and he was trying to do a back away off the bars and he kept smacking his feet on the bar. Now, the bar's made of steel, so this must have been really hurting his feet, this little boy. And the coach took him around the corner and all of a sudden we're hearing a tap running. And so I'm looking at Sergei going, what? And we're all looking at him and he's going, don't look, don't look. And the boy comes back out, back away onto the steel bar, back round to the tap. And he's under the coach is obviously, I didn't see it, but I'm guessing the boy was being put under the tap. And he's so crazy, like unbelievable, right? So I've seen the worst of the worst in terms of the coaching culture that used to exist, and whether that still exists in those parts of the world, I don't know.
Wait. So they were like beating him with?
He was getting waterboarded on the tap. This young boy, yeah. And obviously, what am I going to do? I'm a 13-year-old child, right?
Yeah.
In a foreign country, I don't speak the language. I'm not going to do anything. But I can remember seeing that and being completely frightened and thinking, wow, I'm glad it's not like that where I live. You know, I'm glad that's not the culture here. Yeah, unbelievable. I know I've gone on a massive tangent there, but just to share some of my experiences of what I saw when I was a kid in the sport. It's tough. It's really tough. And whenever you've got a situation where adults are being left with kids alone in a big, massive gym, and sometimes they're training 1-to-1, you know, you've got to be very careful as a parent what situations you're putting your child in. And the thing is, right, I imagine when you have I've got a little boy, he's 2 years old. And I imagine when you go to your first parents' evening at school and they tell you your kid's really bright and he's great at maths, you probably leave going, oh, my kid, that feels so great. So if you have coaches telling you your kid's going to go to the Olympics, all of a sudden, before you know it, you're in. And you're going to choose to see what you want to see, and it becomes very tough and very complicated. And I've seen that world break a lot of people, you know. A lot of my friends, the people that I grew up with, went on to struggle with all sorts of mental health issues, whether that's been alcohol abuse, gambling, eating disorders, depression, anxiety. It's a tough thing. And it's hard, right? Because I heard someone say something once, it was on a podcast, and they said, do swimmers look like swimmers because they swim, or are they attracted to swimmers because they're built like swimmers? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I thought about gymnastics, and I thought, do you know what? Most of the kids that end up doing gymnastics are the kids that can't sit still at school. They're the kids that have got so much energy, and they don't fit into regular school life, and they might struggle academically, but physically they're gifted. And a lot of those kids are neurodiverse. And I don't think it's a surprise that many of us go on to really struggle after retirement with figuring out how to fit back into normal society, because our brains weren't wired that way. And most of the time we were taken out of normal childhood and we trained and missed schooling and didn't have friends and didn't build relationships and weren't given the opportunity or the platform to make mistakes, right? Most normal 18-year-old kids in the UK will go out with their friends drinking, and if they make a mistake, everybody says, oh, that's okay, you're just 18, don't do it again. But if you're an athlete, you can't live that life. You're told no partying, no drinking, no mistakes, you've got to be perfect. And it's tough, it's intense, you know, and some people can handle that and some people can't. But also, what I would say to everybody listening is, I sit on my podcast and I've done 156 episodes now, and I sit with athletes from all over the world, men's and women's artistic gymnastics, trampolining, tumbling, from other sports, and nearly every single one of them says, when asked the question, I wouldn't change it though, because it's made me who I am. I just hope that wouldn't happen to me, and I can learn from those mistakes and share them and make sure no other kids go through that. So I feel the same way about gymnastics, and I have to say, on the whole, my experience was a really positive one. And I don't want to take that, away from anybody that's had an experience and feels differently. But, for me and my personal experience, there were a lot of negative things that happened, but overwhelmingly it was positive. And my whole life today has been made possible because of gymnastics. I talk about gymnastics, I coach gymnastics, I manage gymnasts, I produce gymnastics content, and that's all come from that incredible sport that I started when I was 7 years old. And so I think it's important to acknowledge the bad and never forget it. And if there's a topic that's worth talking about, you have to talk about it and keep doing that, keep beating that drum, to make so that anybody that thinks that potentially they can get away with coaching in a certain way, or that type of culture, or that behavior is okay, they need to know that there are people there watching, and that will be, called out and stamped out. So I do think it's better, and I do think men's and women's is a little bit different, but I do think that we suffer with a lot of the same challenges and setbacks. And you would typically maybe think that eating disorders affect women way more, but I know so many of my old teammates that had eating disorders, me being one of them, and I'd watched so many people go through that I thought, that will never happen for me. That won't happen to me. Like, I'm not going to let that happen to me. And then before I know it, I'm sat with a therapist and she's getting me to do a food log because I'm effectively starving myself, right? And that's kind of the way it goes. But I do think that the men's and the women's athletes can work together a little bit more. I hope that there's that more connection and unity. And I do think that is. I do think a lot of the, I'll speak for Great Britain, a lot of the men's guys look after the girls a lot more now. And yeah, I hope that's the case. There needs to be so much more collaboration between people.
Yes.
Like the men's side of the sport, the women's side of the sport. Maybe the mixed team event might do that.
Yes.
That'd be a real positive thing, wouldn't it,
Mm-hmm.
I started, sorry, Jessica, I started coaching when I retired, and I coached about 10 different groups a week. So it was anywhere from disability children to I coached 8-year-old girls that were elite gymnasts, recreational guys, men that wanted to try and go to the Olympics, club boys that were just learning to do cartwheels. And my favorite group to coach were the 8-year-old elite girls. They had like the biggest personalities ever, and I used to get in trouble for just sitting down and talking to them about school and who they fell out with and trying to help them fix their friendships. But they were like the bravest kids in the world. There was this little girl called Darcy, and Darcy was like petrified of doing a flick on beam. She was so terrified of it. And I was like, right, I have a theory that when it comes to mental blocks, it's because the athlete's got too much thinking time, and it's normally on something that's quite easy for them. So they fill their brain space with what could happen, what if I hurt myself, rather than the step-by-step process of the things they need to do to make that skill successful. So I broke it down with Darcy on the floor, and I supported her to do a flick. And I said, Darcy, what are the 4 things that you need to do a great flick? And she said, drive through my legs, swing my arms, see my hands, and stand up strong. And I said, I'm going to support you. We'll do it slowly. Say them out loud as you're doing them. So she'd shout it out loud, and she'd get a bit braver and then be a bit louder. And I said, amazing. Right, now let's do it again, but say it inside your head. Don't say it out loud. And then we did it again. I was like, that's so good. Okay, let's do it on the low beam. And then I said, why don't you try it by yourself? And then within a few weeks, she'd do a flick on a high beam. And she knew that when she stood there, if she just did step 1, 2, 3, and 4, she'd put her body in the right place to do the skill well, and hopefully that gave her, somewhat of a framework to use if she ever had a mental block again. But I felt like if I'm going to test this theory out on Darcy, I need to try it myself. So I relearned a Lukin on high bar because I was so frightened of that skill. Whenever I would try and think about it, I'd get sweaty palms. And it worked, like it really worked. But what I learned from that was that these girls that get on that beam were so brave, like so much braver than I was. And the respect I had for women's gymnastics after that was huge. It was massive.
I love that story. Is such a good example also of like the importance of knowing the importance of you coaching is a conversation. It's not a telling. It's not just a telling people what to do. And knowing your athlete, even if they're little kids, is so important. And like my favorite coaching job ever, ever, ever was when I coached a high school gymnastics team. So there were people who were level 10s and could have gotten college scholarships. Well, some did get college scholarships, and others who they were refugees from countries where girls were not allowed to do sports. And this was their first time ever doing a sport. And they were not allowed to wear leotards. So we're like, okay, wear tights. Like, we can cover you from your ankles to your wrists. We can totally do that. And the judges were amazing. And obviously, they're not going to take a deduction. And that was absolutely my favorite job, because learning all of their stories and learning what motivated them and seeing like these wealthy, privileged kids who had the advantage of gymnastics and everything in their life that supported them, working and learning from the kids that this is their first time, and vice versa, was the best thing. And learning their stories, talking to them, seeing what was important to them. Like, I loved that. Was my most favorite job ever besides this. And ironically, this job is, talking to people and learning about them. All of that is pretty much the job. But the other thing about that is I was talking to one of my nieces who's coaching a different sport, but I was like, what are the athletes like? What do they like? What are they into? Like, where do they live? What are their families like? And she was like, oh, I don't know. And I was like, oh, girl, this is the job. Anybody can be like, here, put your arms up, turn over. But knowing people and knowing what motivates them and knowing what the whole situation that they bring to the game or the floor or whatever is the job. And I think there's, like we were talking about, the arrogance. There is so much arrogance in gymnastics, which I think part of it comes from you have to convince someone that you are safe to save their life. You're talking about spotting, right? We say spotting here. They have to trust you that you will literally save their life. How many other people are in that job a lot of people start coaching in high school or middle school. How many people, like, I don't know, firefighters, police, who else is in that job? I'm going to save your life. And it is one of those things that you have to present, confidence, but you also have to be a kind of person that can hear and listen and can build trust. And I see so much of the arrogance in gymnastics. And I'm so glad that you brought up the age of the women, because it's something that drives me fucking crazy. It makes me so fucking mad, because what does it say? That they are like, men aren't mature enough physically until they're 18, right? They're like, men don't get their good enough hormones until they're at least 18 to compete, right? And really, it should probably be like 25, honestly. Because I would say, from your experience, do you feel like you were stronger in like your 20s than your teenage years?
Do you know what was really hard for me, Jessica, was that there were so many old school ideas within the sport when I grew up. So the idea that you would peak at 23. So I just had it fixated in my head, 23. After 23, I'm done. I'm finished. Never do weight
Really?
training.
Even in men's gymnastics?
Yeah, 23, that's it. 23. I had it, I remember me and Max did our first Japan Cup, and we
Whitlock.
were sharing a room. Yeah, and we were sharing a room. And we were just chatting, and I said, I want to go to the Olympics at 23, and then I'm going to retire. I'm done after that. I'm finished. And Max at the time, he said, well, I want to go to like 3 Olympics, maybe 4, because I want to have a child, and I want them to watch me at the Olympics, which the amazing thing is, that was at the age of 17, and Max did that. So that tells you a lot about Max, right? But I just had it in my head. And a lot of, I think a lot of my heroes won Olympic all-around gold medals at 23, so that didn't really help, right? Like, there seems to be an age of 23 in men's gymnastics that works pretty well. So I was like, oh, okay, like I've got to be 23. That's got to be the age. But that wasn't true. There was no evidence to that. There was no science. It was just, a lack of opening up to. It was the same when sports science came in Great Britain. The coaches didn't want to know. I don't want to know. I remember, so at the start of every year, in January, we would do profiling testing. So it was physical profiling, mental health profiling, psychological profiling, and we would do an exercise where you would do single leg press at 3/4 of your body weight, and you did it to a metronome. So it went ding, ding, ding. You went up, down, and 40 reps was maxing out. So if you did 40 reps on each leg at 75% of your body weight, you maxed out. And it was pretty hard to do that.
That's
but
very
after
hard.
a few years, most of us could get up there. And Johnny was still a junior in that January. We did the testing, and he did 3 on one leg and 6 on the other. And the strength and conditioning coach said, look, Johnny, this isn't okay. There's a real imbalance in the strength in your legs. These numbers are not good. You need to get stronger because we need to protect your knees. Now, at the time, the coach's response was, Johnny's better than all the seniors on floor. He doesn't need to do this. Now, 6 months later, Johnny shattered his knee and did his cruciate ligament. And a few weeks after that, I spoke to the S&C coach and I said, what happens when somebody does their ACL? And he said, well, Sam, normally it's because there's an imbalance between their hamstring strength and their quad strength, and nobody trains hamstrings. And I was like, what, really? And so
especially in gymnastics, the training hamstrings is so lacking, or it was back then anyway.
It's not there, yeah. And so when I heard that, I was like, right, I'm always going to do hamstrings now. And 2 years later, I did a double front off parallel bars, and I was learning double front half. I was doing it pretty easy. I did a double front half, went back to a double front, and it was so high. I landed on a complete straight leg. My leg bowed backwards, but my hamstring held on, and I tore my hamstring, but my knee was fine. I was like, oh, thank God I listened to that coach when he said that. But it was that attitude all the time to anything from the outside. It was, I don't want to know, I don't want to listen. And what's really funny is that attitude is so in the beginning, when a lot of the outside influence of that knowledge from the Soviet Union came in, everybody wanted the knowledge. But then after a few years, when the coaches that were from the UK, or they'd be from the country that those coaches came to, got to the point where they'd taken in a lot of that expertise and that knowledge, they then didn't really want to know anymore. And those coaches were disrespected. And that was always a shame for me, because, it was kind of like we took their knowledge and now we don't need you anymore. And a lot of these countries, they've been producing high-level athletes for decades upon decades. They have traditions. When I went to visit Japan, I was gobsmacked when I went to watch their national championships, and I realized that gymnastics is a family tradition there. Like you would have families that are in the building trade in the UK, you would have generations of gymnasts, and they just pass that knowledge on and on and on. And that blew my mind. Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
Yeah, the interesting thing about, so my degree is in exercise science, my bachelor's degree is in exercise science, and doing that degree, and I did the athletic training pathway, which would be sports physio for you guys, and I was just, every day I was like, oh my God, all gymnastics coaches should be in jail. What the hell? My mind was so blown at how bad technique was, the numbers were, the way we were taught to land back then. Do you want to tear everything in your knees? Land like a gymnast in the 90s, the 2000s. Horrible. And then the irony is that, like, exactly like you said, like the Soviets, tons of people from the Soviet systems and East Germany and Australia later also have like the best exercise science programs, had already come here. But then people were like, oh, we don't need to do that. We don't need, or what they had taken from it is, be brutal and keep gymnasts young so you can control them, not this is the science part that we can learn from. But I do remember I worked at this one gym where this just like regular, I don't know, they would be like, what's your like compulsory levels? They're like, you're just doing
it
back
would be like
walkovers and
the elite grades in the UK for the MAG, so men's artistic. For the women's, I think it would be grades as well. I don't. I'm pretty sure it's grades, but I could be wrong.
yeah, they were like you're doing back tucks and back handsprings and back walkovers, stuff like that. They went to Dynamo is it in Moscow, I think, or it's in Russia, and they were
Yeah.
just very basic U.S. athletes, and they went and this gym that I worked at, the coach there had they had a videotape of their entire training that they did at Dynamo. So they worked out with the Russian athletes, and these were like 12-year-old versus like 8-year-olds, but they did the whole workout, and just their warm up, no one could finish. Just there because they were so strong, like their conditioning was insane and it was so hard. And I would like later I would see that became a normal warm up in the US. That's something still that's standard is what I saw in that video from the early mid 80s probably. But one of the coolest things in that video that I will never forget is I'm like it's coming back, but back then it was normal to do, someone would do 3 series on beam or 5 series on beam was insane. But what they did was they had 2 beams. So this is in, Moscow, high beams backed up against each other. So it was like one 30-foot long beam. And they did handstand walks all the way down one way, all the way down the other, forwards, backwards, sideways on this double long beam. And they did series on it. So if you were going to compete 3 layouts, you were in practice learning how to stay on, even if you were a little bit off, on 6 in a row or 7 in a row or 8 in a row. And they had a contest to see who could fit the most in, and they just started gainering them so they could, not take up as much space. And I was like, that's when I realized, like, I just had like a total epiphany about the difference between competing and like competing successfully, which would be if you're competing at your absolute maximum talent level, it's, I think most of the time like that. So you're competing the hardest skills you can possibly do ever. You're not going to be successful. That is too hard. You should be competing the skills that are normal for you, that you've been doing for years, and that you can do successfully, basically, 90% of the time. And I think there was such a push in the US, especially to like, I don't know how it is in the UK, but like because of the financial system, which is very much like it is there, right? You have to pay for your own gymnastics. And it's like, well, we have to keep the kids happy and the parents happy. So like, even if they're falling the whole time while they're competing, because we don't have time to make them strong enough and time to give them the hours. So many people had like not a great experience competing because they were doing their absolute maximum hardest, or it's like embarrassing to be 10 years old and you're still just doing a back walkover or something. So they're like, you can do harder things, but you're going to fall, you're going to get a 3 on beam every time you compete because you fall so many times. But yeah, anyway, I was just thinking about the Soviet system and how fascinating it is and how that video is always stuck in my mind.
They always had specialists as well. So they would have like tumbling coaches from tumbling, coach the tumbling. They'd have A-bar specialists that coach A-bars. They all had choreographers from a young age, so they do ballet. They got to such a level of specialization in coaching. They had coaches that would be the person that does this or the strength. Even like for men's gymnastics, when I went to Round Lake and I visited the National Centre there, I just thought I'd never seen a gymnastics gym that was next to it in full view of the gym was like a full weights area. And I was like, I've never seen that before. And this was 2009. I was like, the transition from a junior gymnast looking over to the weights gym and just being able to walk in and start to play around, they'll start getting stronger from such an earlier age. From having your own gymnastics gym and then you've got to go and find a weights gym. Like, you'll never do that. But if you see the older kids doing it, you'll go, oh, can I try that? Oh, maybe I should do that. Even that in itself, I was like, that's really smart. That's why they're so strong. And I'm sure there's other reasons too, right? But I'm sure that's why they're so strong from such a young age, because they're doing that. They've got that education. And most of the coaches in Russia have a master's in sports degree. So they learn the science behind physical training. And that's why, that system was brought to me. Now, the problem with bringing that system to somewhere like the UK is that in Russia, you have a conveyor belt of athletes. So if you break a few, doesn't matter. We don't have that. So that's why I was broken by the time I was in my mid-20s, because I was doing 40 hours a week when I was a 9-year-old kid, crazy hours.
That's so nuts. And I mean, this is what has been so interesting. It's been the biggest complaint about the US system under the way that it used to be and the way it was under the Carollis, was just like, oh, conveyor belt. Like, you are a factory farm. If one dies, you just bring in another one. It doesn't matter because there's so many. And I remember talking to Patrick and Damon in the Netherlands years ago when they first started coming up with Athora. And they were like, and I was like, you guys, the gymnastics is like revolutionary. They're basically the Netherlands was use the code to the advantage because we can't risk anyone being hurt. And I was like, how do you even do that? Like here, it's like, do the hardest thing you can do. And if you break, oh, well, you weren't strong enough. And they were like, we don't have the people. We don't have the population. Exactly what you're talking about. Like, we cannot go. We don't have enough human beings in the country to operate that way. And I was like, oh, wait, what if every country operated like each gymnast was important? And you need to make sure they can last and they have the motivation and their body isn't destroyed.
I think, when most athletes, most gymnasts, when they retire, the knee-jerk reaction is get as far away from this sport as I possibly can, right? And what happened to me was that most of my best friends, who will be groomsmen at my wedding, are gymnastics coaches in elite gymnastics. So whenever I'm with them, that's where the conversation always goes. And they ask me my opinion and we get talking. And I was like, this is never going anywhere. Like this, they're my best friends. I want them to be in my life. So I started to take an interest. And I kind of always say to them that, look, if you have a gymnast that gets to the highest level, that's just a byproduct. You can't play that game. You never know whether the most talented athlete you'll ever have will walk through your doors in your first year of coaching or your last year of coaching. You just have to do the best you can at that time with the knowledge and the experience that you've gained. But your priority is to create a great human, because that human is going to go into society, and whatever it is that they've picked up from their experience, they're going to pass on to the community around them. And that gets super wide. And for every kid that makes it to the Olympics, there are 1,000 that don't. And if that 999 have had a bad experience, they're going to go into life after gymnastics and continue to pass that on. So your job and the ultimate goal is that when that person that you coached once gets married, you get invited to their wedding because you had an amazing impact on their life. And so that's kind of the way I coach, right? That's the most important thing. It's not the gymnastics stuff. I'm not really bothered about that. Even like if I'm looking at what makes a great coach, what I need as an athlete is someone that's consistent, reliable, is organized. They're going to work as hard as they can. They're going to look after me. None of those things, and there's a handful more, none of those are technical. I don't care. We can learn the technique together. If you don't know how to do a casino, let's go learn it together. Right. Don't pretend that you know, but let's go. All right, I don't know. I actually don't.
Please don't pretend that you know.
God, yeah, yes. I don't know how to teach you this, but I'll go and ask some people and we'll figure this out. And it was exactly what you said, right? That arrogance. Within my first half a year of coaching, I was supporting a little girl on A-bars doing a blind fall, right? And I'm nervous, and she can tell I'm nervous because, and one thing I noticed about gymnastics that really scared me in the beginning was if I wanted to avoid practicing supporting, I could do that really easily. I could sit back and just make the kids do preps where it didn't get risky and I didn't have to put myself out. So I used to force myself to support things. Mm-hmm. And if I saw something in the gym, I still do go, can you show me how to support that? Can I have a go? And I'd heard a lot of coaches say things like, well, you got to break a few eggs, and oh, I don't want to break any eggs because I don't want to hurt any kid. I don't want to drop anyone. And obviously making mistakes is part of coaching too, right? But this girl, we were doing a blind fall, and she fell and she landed on the side of the mat. And I was like, I'm so sorry, Evie. Like, are you okay? That was completely my fault. I promise next time, we won't let that happen. We'll practice it on the floor. And the coach that was with me at the time, who wasn't the most experienced coach, she said, my mentor told me that even if you make a mistake, don't ever let the kid know that it was your fault, like it was their fault, because then they won't trust you. And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I understand what you're, like, the angle. That makes no sense to me. They're going to trust me way more if I'm honest with them. So I'm going to tell them every single time that if it was my fault, it was my fault. Like, they need to trust me. I'm not going to lie to them, because you get caught out in the end, right? But it was really interesting, because that was probably a reflection of a lot of the gymnastics coaching community is, if you don't know something, pretend like you do. If a kid hurts themselves, pretend it's their fault. If they can't do it, and maybe it's technical, it's because you put on too much weight, or it's because you've not done enough, or it's because you didn't sleep last night. Like, that drives me insane. Like, so many times in a gym, I'd look at something and go, there'd be a coach getting frustrated, and I'd be like, that's just a technique issue. I know what they're doing wrong. Like, I know that that's wrong, and you're telling them it's everything other than the technique issue because you don't know it, and you're not brave enough or secure enough in yourself to go and ask somebody to help you. And I understand it, because it's an intimidating environment. And you see that in the national centres a lot, right? Like, if it's a young coach that's coming there for the first time, so frightened of looking like they don't know what they don't know, but you don't know what you don't know, do you?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So, Spencer, we love having Storyworth as a sponsor. Mm-hmm. We've had multiple members of the family use Storyworth. Each week, they send your mom or the mother figure in your life a question about her life, and she responds however she wants. She can write an email, go on the web and respond. She can voice record, which is new this year. There's a guided phone call, no apps or logins or anything like that. What have you learned through Storyworth about your mom?
Okay, so my new favorite discussion topic question that I feel like is very interestingly revealing, because I would have thought, surprising none of our listeners, just my mom and I are very close. Comes as no surprise to anyone. I thought I knew all of the stories. Recently, my topic was a memorable encounter with a stranger that you still think about to this day. I highly recommend this as a question just to get a conversation started in any situation, because it's very revealing. I learned a story about my mom that I'd never known before, and I also can't stop thinking about. So she was a teenager. She was at the beach, and it was like at the beach house with a couple of her friends, no parents. Like, we're really feeling ourselves. We're very cool. We're going to walk down the beach to the pier and go to like the ice cream place and walk around, and we're the coolest people in the whole wide world. Everything is great. So they're walking down the beach toward the pier area, and there is an old, grizzled, homeless, maybe beach urchin man who goes, I want to throw sand on those bell-bottom pants. And so they all scream and run back to the house and have to hide under the couch. Or have to hide under a table and slam the door. And I love this story, and I have been thinking about it once a day since I learned this story. I can't stop. This is the kind of thing you get. You think you know all the stories, and then suddenly you get sand on the bell-bottom pants, and then you can't stop thinking about it.
This is why I love that you can choose the pre-written questions, or you can write your own questions.
Writing your own. I'm giving you the recommendation right now.
And Storyworth, like, people love it. It has more than 50,000 5-star reviews. And now they have this unlimited plan. With the unlimited plan, you buy it once, and then you'll be able to give Storyworth memoirs to friends and family all year. Plus, it comes with all their newest features and the multiple full color book copies, which I have, which my mom did. And so there's pictures of the house that her mom and dad built by hand with the giant horses. That means you can get all your Mother's Day gifts for your mom, grandma, and any mom figures in your life. Plus, take care of Father's Day while you're at it. The unlimited plan, you guys, we suggest. How do the people get the deal?
This year, give mom a gift that helps her reflect on her life with fresh perspective and gives your whole family the gift of her stories. Mother's Day is Sunday, May 10th. Order right now and save up to $20 at storyworth.com/gymcastic. Save up to $20 at storyworth.com/gymcastic. storyworth.com/gymcastic.
If I ever have a gym one day, you know, the kind of culture I hope is going to be one of, if you don't know something, let's work together and figure it out. Like, there's nothing wrong with not knowing. That's great. I think I feel like that because I was diagnosed with childhood ADHD at 30, and I just thought I was a stupid kid because I was the naughty kid, and I thought I was the stupid kid. But it was just because I couldn't sit still in English. I couldn't concentrate on a page long enough because my brain was off somewhere else, and you know, I was always scared of putting my hand up and saying the wrong thing, or, you know, I would say something and then I get told off for saying something. So I think for me, I just, whether it's a kid or anyone, I want them to ask me questions, ask me why, ask more. Let's discuss this, you know, because they'll teach you so much, the kids. You'll learn from the kids so much more. And even the athletes, you know, and they might say, I can see what you're saying, but I don't feel like that. Like sometimes Sergei would say to me, Sam, it looks amazing, it's perfect. And I would go, yeah, but it doesn't feel right. And sometimes he'd say, this is quite wrong. I'd say, yeah, but it feels good. I know what I'm trying to feel, like the feeling's good. And there'd be a mismatch. And then when we got to it feels good and it looks right, that was like, the sweet spot. But we had to communicate to learn that, you know, like there has to be that, like, you have to take a real interest. When you're spending that much time, if you've got an hour football session a week and there's 30 kids, you can't do that. It's not realistic. But if you've got 5 children and you coach them for 3 hours, 3 nights a week, then you've got to spend the time to learn about their life. You know, I was coaching someone recently and, you know, I was wondering, I was like, wow, God, they're struggling a bit. Like, this is hard. They're very emotional. And then I found out later that they're having issues in their personal life outside of the gym. I was like, that makes so much sense. If I'd had that context, I could have approached that session so differently. And I approached the next session completely differently, and we had a great session. It was amazing, you know? So it's a good kind of example of that, you know, as a coach, like trying your best to really know the human first.
Yep. I remember, I remember the times that I would have a kid that was all of a sudden just either having a total mental block out of nowhere or just was like not behaving like themselves at all. And each time I would try to figure it out. And then if I talked to the parents, I would find out like the parents were getting a divorce. So, you know, of course the kid is freaking out and is not themselves. And another time, this is crazy and sad, but it was just a very unusual person. One gymnast, her dad built he was crazy and wild and very interesting. Anyway, he built a helicopter first of all, crazy enough, in their, you know, garage, and then he flew it and it crashed. Shockingly, when you build your own helicopter, even as an engineer, these things can happen. So, like, you know, he was in the hospital and he was very seriously injured. And of course, she doesn't want to be at gymnastics. She's worried about her dad. You know, she's having a mental block. She's afraid of being hurt. Oh, look what just happened, you know? And it's those things about, knowing the person, which I wanted to go back to talking about like neurodivergence in gymnastics. And I remember Lewis Smith, of course, your teammate, and he talked about this a lot. And I always think when gymnasts say, oh, gymnastics taught me discipline, from my experience, gymnastics did not teach me any discipline other than outside of the gym making choices. But because I never had a choice in gymnastics, it was a prescribed routine. And it was, what I liked about it was like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen today. Like, I know we're going to do the same boring warm up and conditioning that I have to do, but like, I don't know what the assignment's going to be. I don't know what the assignment's going to be here. And like, when I went on to wrestling, then like a lot of it was up to me. And I also didn't know it was going to happen because you're wrestling a partner, which you have no idea what they're going to do. So you have to react, and it's all new. It wasn't like, here's a prescribed set of wrestling moves, we're all going to do them. And like, I feel like I got so much more discipline from that because I had to make so many more decisions on my own. And it just wasn't as prescribed. And I think that one of the things that gymnastics that is so hard is it's dangerous. So you have to have you have to be disciplined in what you allow kids to do, and there has to be parameters for their own safety, which is why I hate open gym, because I've seen so many accidents at open gyms. It drives me nuts. But on the other hand, yeah, I feel like men's gymnastics, and maybe it's because when you're at the upper levels, you have more trust from your coaches and they trust you to do more, make your own decisions. But I felt like in women's gymnastics, was a lot less, and there still is. What do you need to do today? What do you think you need to work on? Go do that, but tell me what you're going to do, because you can't do 70, layout full, like whatever, because you'll hurt your back. So tell me what you need to do, and then let's make sure we have a limit to that, so that you can do drills for it, but you can't actually do so many that it's gonna, overload your body or whatever. But do you see? How do you feel about that? What do you think about
In terms of the discipline of
the learning to do things on your own and having your own kind of control over what you do versus everything's prescribed because it's dangerous?
Well, I had an interview recently with Kazuma Kaya, the Japanese Olympic gold medalist. That was fascinating because I asked him to explain a little bit about the Japanese system and how it works. And he said up until the age of high school, so under the age of 12, everything is done by the coach. So the coach decides the training plan, the program, how many goes they have. It's very hands-on. And he says as soon as they get to high school, the coach starts to step back a bit. And it becomes about a 50-50 mix. And he said as soon as they get to college, the coach might say one or two things in a whole session. That's it. It's up to the gymnasts to coach themselves, coach each other. And if there's one thing that's very, very important that the gymnast needs to hear, the coach might come in and say it. Otherwise, they don't say it. They believe in autonomous training. And I was like, whoa, that's so different to what we do like in the UK or in America or the rest of Europe. That's really, really interesting because they're now learning to problem solve themselves. And I remember getting into my mid-20s and saying to Sergei one day, Sergei, I know what to do. I don't know why. I don't know why. So if I'm going to help somebody else learn this skill, I can tell them the right exercises and preparations, but I don't really deeply understand why they need to do that. And Sergei said, well, now you're thinking like a coach. I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And I think you're right. I think men's coaches and athletes are a lot more collaborative and there's more mutual respect. I would say my experience growing up, and look, I don't know whether this is still the case, but on the women's side, it was certainly very different to that. They were treated as other.
Yep.
And I can tell you that because the women's coaches would always come up and say hello and be very friendly with the men's athletes, but they didn't treat the women's gymnasts like that. There was a real distinction.
Yep.
And part of that might be because they're so young, right? They're expected to be competing at the highest level at 15, 16. They are a child. But I'm not having to do that until I'm considered legally in the UK a man at 18. And maybe that changes the fabric of things a little bit. Now, that wouldn't change the way I interact with another human being, but there might be that difference there in framework changes things a little bit, I think. And it was certainly more about like power and control. So, look, the girls at Lilleshall, right? When we were kids, as soon as we could get cars and drive, we'd drive to the shops just because we wanted to get out of the Lilleshall and do something. And the coaches would let us do it, the men's coaches, because we were 17 or 18 and we could drive now. And the girls would get us to buy chocolate for them. And we'd go around the back of the dorms and throw the chocolate through the windows, which is nuts, but we would do that. And we all used to think it was hilarious, but, it was just different. We were allowed to do things they weren't. Yeah, it's a shame, because we were so close in age, but felt light years apart in terms of the way we were treated. I was treated like a normal 18-year-old, other than having to be super disciplined with the way that I lived my life. But they were treated like toddlers, children, that couldn't make decisions for themselves. And in my experience, all of those girls are incredibly smart and intelligent and way more mature than I was. You know, at 15, 16, those girls were way more mature than I was at 18 as a man, you know. So
Yep.
I think there is that difference. I'd hope that that would change, you know. It'd be interesting to know now, you know, if you were, I'm sure you've chatted to them, Jessica, female athletes are carrying on for much longer. Do they report that they have more of a collaborative relationship with their coach? You know, because, you know, it's still a relatively new thing that we've got female gymnasts continuing into their 30s, other than Chusavitna, like 20 years ago, that just wasn't really happening. And it was very rare if it was. Whereas it seems to be more commonplace for girls to be in their mid-20s, pushing towards their 30s.
Yeah. It is. It's definitely, there are athletes who report that is very collaborative. And I think like part of that too is like, if you have a great gymnast and you want them to stick around, like you can't treat them like a child anymore because they won't put up with that. And the coaches that do treat them like that, the athletes don't go back to them. I mean, a lot of them, they go to college now, and the colleges support their elite careers, which was not a thing that happened a lot. Like it happened in the past. There were Olympians on college teams in the past, but now you couldn't be a USAG didn't support it, but now they do. So it's much better for them, but they would experience a team atmosphere and more autonomy. And a lot of them were like, I don't want to go back to be treated like a 12-year-old. You know, I'm an adult. So it is more collaborative. And one of the biggest changes that I see, like the athletes do not care. A lot of them, not all, because there's still coaches that tell them insane things about eating, and they're not allowed to talk to them about food. They're not allowed to talk to them about weight, but they still do. But a lot of the gymnasts are just like, I hate this food. I'm going to eat a burger or whatever in front of you. Or the coaches will go out and get them real food when the stuff like at Liverpool, the food was terrible. And the gymnasts, and also the gym, like if you're the last ones and you go to the medal ceremony, then all the food would be gone when they got there. So it wasn't even just that it was whatever was, it was the stuff nobody wanted that was left over, I should say. Not all the food was terrible.
Yeah, not all the food in Liverpool was terrible.
Not
I've
all the
eaten some
food.
nice places in
Yes,
Liverpool.
there's some delicious food in Liverpool. Let me say, I like English food. I'm not putting it down. But yeah, it would be like the fish that had been there for 4 hours was the only thing left over, and then so it is nice to see that the athletes like also don't care about saying like, oh, how am I going to celebrate my medal? Oh, I'm going to go eat a donut in the hotel right now, like that kind of stuff. That they just are like, yeah, I'm fine. This is the body that can do this, and I will, you know, treat myself, because if you don't, then you go down the path of food being evil.
Yeah, I would, you know, when I was struggling with the eating, in the end, what I realized was I would always want more energy than not enough. I need more energy. I'd rather be heavier and stronger. And then it started to become about how I felt. Do I feel strong? Because if I feel strong, then I'm good, you know? And if I feel strong in the weights gym, I feel strong in the gymnastics gym. If I feel like physically I can take the volume and the load of the sport, then I feel good and my confidence is higher, right? I remember, you know, it was so funny when I was at a point in my career where I just couldn't put it together anymore, you know? And all I needed was somebody to tell me, your body's broken. It's not your fault. It's not your fault, you know? And I'd been told in kind of the December, okay, if you don't hit this score in April, you're off the squad. And I'd been on the squad since I was 9 years old. So I'd been on the squad from 9 years old until I was 26. And my response to that was, okay, well, I've got to hit this score then. So let's do anything to get this score. Now, that was a score that nobody scored in that cycle. So it was an outrageous score. But I jumped to, right, I'm going to try everything I possibly can and micromanage, and because I'm on my own and no one's going to help me because I'm not good enough. And if I want to get help, I need to get better scores, right? That is my fault. It was super self-critical. And so what I did was I started fasting because I'd listened to a podcast where somebody had talked about fasting. Now, I omitted the part where they had an autoimmune disease, and that's why they were doing that. And I thought, oh, maybe this is the silver bullet that will figure it out. And I was training, you know, upwards of 5 hours a day, 6 days a week on like something silly like 1,500 calories. And I'm a 70 kilo fully grown man training 5 hours a day, but I'm
Ugh.
trying, and I lost nearly a stone in weight. And when I turned up to that British Championships, knowing that everything was on the line, and I put my hand up to do my first routine, and I did the start of my high bar routine and did a Kovac, I went, ah, shit, because I knew what I'd done, and I wrestled through that routine somehow and landed right on my face on a double straight dismount. And I'd never done that in my life, but it's because I had nothing in the tank. And the irony was, I'd watched my training partner do that 7 years previously. I'd watched it and I did the same thing, So yeah, it's, it's tricky really. Like, it's such a complicated thing to get right, a sports career and an athlete's career. And, do you think it's changed, Jessica? You asked me that question. Do you think that sport has changed and the culture's changed? Do you see that?
Like, especially here, it is wildly different. Wildly different. It is like night and day. The culture at the top, I will say, the culture at the top at elite, the national team, hugely different. Athletes feel free to speak generally. They feel free to communicate. They feel like they have agency. There's more autonomy. The way the sport is covered, which is one of the reasons I started the podcast in the beginning, because I was like, how the fuck is NBC talking about a 20-year-old like she's a toddler? And this is insane. These are grown women. Like, how there's only, what team was it? There's only one teenager on that team, and I was just like, what the hell is happening? It was outrageous to me, even to talk about teenagers like that. I was like, you don't talk about them like toddlers. So all of that has changed. It is a big difference. That athletes are just feel free to support each other, to laugh, to do what they need to do, to eat, even like in public. Those kind of things are so much better and healthier. There are still so many gyms, and the US is a gigantic, huge country, and it's so huge, and every state is like a different. We're more like the Soviet Union in that way. Like, every state's like its own country. The culture at the gyms, there's a lot of gyms that still operate like it's the 80s or the 90s. Like, they just absolutely do the same things, and that's what works, so that's what they're going to do. And then parents buy this lie that your kid is going to make the Olympic team when it's just like less than 1%, and so they put up with things they shouldn't put up with because they think this is going to happen. And I remember one very wise coach, an Olympic coach, said to me, who's been a great advocate, it doesn't matter what you tell parents the first time around, they can't hear it. They don't understand. When their kids have like been through it and they see the consequences of what because the parents are paying for their children to be treated this way. They are paying for it, literally, which kills me. You want to change with your dollar. You don't pay for the gyms that are like this and are doing this to your kids. So when the parents see the consequences, that is when they understand and will stand up and will say, okay, we can stay here, but you're not going to do X, Y, Z, or we're going to find another gym if you won't agree to this. But it made so much sense to me when he said that, because I understand that now as an adult. Someone can tell you something and you can hear it, but you don't get it. You don't understand it, and there is that comprehension of someone can tell you it'll all be worth it. Just make it through this period of time. But when you see the actual consequences, where you're talking about the drug abuse is huge, painkiller addiction, death from overdose, accidental, the eating disorders, one of the deadliest, as you know, mental health disorders. And as we know here, so acutely, and also Britain has had their reckoning with this too, very publicly, the culture around that it enables, sexual abuse so easily when people are afraid to speak up and afraid to take a stand. And so, so I would say at the very top, things are much better. And by much better, I mean there's it, and like then I think about what is the scale of much better for the United States? Like it's like what is the gold standard? We are still like at 50% of the way to the gold standard. Like we're not even close to what it should be, but that's how much better it is than it used to be. And a lot of that is because, if this was like a professional team and you hired the coaches and you had, controlled, but you could have all the athletes in one place and like the Soviet system in a lot of ways, and you could give them everything they needed and they could have autonomy and they could have a say in it and they had a part in how things were run too. Like that is a very different, or a union for the athletes like that you can control so much more. But with like GB and like USA Gymnastics, like you're running a volunteer organization with a bunch of private clubs and you can only have so much say in what the private clubs do. And you can have rules and you can have safe sport, you can have safeguarding, but people can hide a lot. And parents also, it's their first time, as you know, it's your first time being a parent. You don't know what you don't know, and you're trying your best. And you might have the absolute best intentions and you think you've done the right things. And it might be that you don't find out for, until they're an adult that they're like, oh, this really hurt me. And you didn't know that. And you thought that it was right. And I think that's also one of the hard things about coaching. And I was thinking about your Christian the legs Thomas, the greatest Yurchenko double back ever until Simone. I mean, I put them on the same parallel of superstars of Yurchenko double backs. Now, I was thinking about his interview and his allegations against the former men's head coach. And it's really interesting to just listen to that because I feel like there can be, I always say two things can be true at once or seven things can be true at once. So you can have someone who feels like they're doing the very best and like absolutely giving you their heart and soul. And like, I feel like Sergei probably felt like this for you, like he was doing his absolute best for you, but it can still be something that is traumatic for someone and that can affect them. And even though you're doing your best, and even if you don't think it's a big deal, like coming from somewhere where it's normal to be beaten at practice and not fed, how could being told you need to lose 5 pounds be something that's so traumatic and damaging to someone? Like we had to fight each other to get food. And I'm not using him as an example exactly, but
yeah, of course.
That it took me a long time to understand that too, that like trauma is trauma. So even if you don't think something is a big deal to someone, or you're doing your best, or you're trying, or your intention, like impact over intention, your intention is good, and you feel like you're doing it with the most education, and obviously can't tell people they need to lose 5 pounds. Like that's not a good example. But back in the day, that was something that someone would feel like they were helping an athlete with, and it can be something that is so damaging to someone and can have lifetime consequences. And I think that there's not, so going back to your original question, I don't know that there is a lot of coaches who have done the internal introspection to realize that. Like just because you meant the best and you wanted the best and you poured your heart and soul into this, you could still fuck up and you can still go say, I'm sorry. And you can still learn something from that and then do better. And it's that, like we were talking about the narcissism and the egos. And so that's my very long answer to self-reflection. Important.
Yeah, I know. I remember around the time that the Me Too stuff was going on, I don't think he'd mind me sharing this, but I rang Christian one day, and I was working as a labourer for my dad, so I'd be on the building site at 8 in the morning, and then I'd go to train. And I was training against guys that were being paid and training professionally. And I rang him on my break one day, and we had a good chat. And he was like, I feel really ashamed I didn't say anything. And I was like, yeah, me too, man. And he was like, it was just normal. Like we didn't know any different. And I was like, yeah, like you didn't do that. I didn't do that. I wish I was educated more, but I was focusing on trying to keep my funding. And, I had all of this pressure on my shoulders. But that was a moment me and Christian shared. And I think we both feel quite, Christian works with the Premier League here. with the players. Like, he looks after the players' well-being and welfare. And I think we both probably just took that from that, like a big life lesson, because we would see things that, in retrospect, look ridiculous, but then it was commonplace and it was normal. I think it just upset us both, it was funny. When I was 19 and I went to the Olympics and I won an Olympic medal, I felt like a fraud because I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So I see everything very binary in life. And when I missed my Kachev half in the high bar final, I fell. And so 20,000 people went like that. And I thought, when I sat back down in my chair, that I'd just cost Great Britain the first medal in 100 years. So I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the bad guy forever. There's no getting away from this. And we managed to go on, and like other teams made a lot more mistakes, and we won a bronze medal, the first medal in 100 years. Now, everyone's so happy, but inside, it was tormenting my brain. I felt like, you're smiling at me and shaking my hand, but you're really thinking I didn't deserve to be here and I don't deserve this medal. And I remember at the time thinking, why aren't the older gymnasts like coming up to me and helping me and giving me advice and asking me if I'm okay? And it wasn't until years later that I realized they were only 22. And when I was 22, I wouldn't have done that either because I had my own stuff. And the reality is, even at 25, I might not have been in the right headspace. And when we spoke about, the human brain is not fully formed until you're in your mid-20s, it's not. I was still a child at 21 and 22 and 23. I can say that now as a 33-year-old. And in part, that's life, right? Like, the goal is that in 5 years' time, I'll look back and I won't be the same human because I'm supposed to learn. And I'm supposed to make mistakes. And I think somebody that can admit to those mistakes and learn from them, that's the goal. It isn't to try and be perfect. There are no perfect people. I remember during that Me Too stuff around the same time, I had to have a long, hard look at my own experience and my own career. And my very personal, unique experience I had with my coach and my whole gymnastics life. I was pulled out of school at 14 and effectively did something very illegal and homeschooled, but didn't really homeschool, and basically just played Call of Duty on my PlayStation and went to the gym all day, which was my dream for a kid with ADHD when I was 15. That was it. It was like incredible. Probably wasn't the best for me as a human, right? And so I sat, and me and Sergei had this conversation, and I had sat in a therapy session after being diagnosed with depression and anxiety when I was 26, and I was looking out the window one day for like 5 minutes, and the therapist said, "What are you most frightened of?" And I said, "I'm scared that I'm going to go to the next Olympics and win a gold medal, and when I wake up the next morning, I'm going to feel like I feel right now." And she said, "Well, why do that then? Why would you do that? Change something. You don't have to do that. No one's making you do that." And she was great, because what I needed personally, and this isn't for everyone, is I needed somebody that would push back on me hard, and I went, and me and Sergei had a conversation. I said, "We got this all wrong. We did it all wrong. It was completely wrong the way that we approached this whole thing." I decided at the age of 11 that I was going to measure the success of my life off whether or not I was the Olympic all-around champion. I could never win. Everything was a failure. When I became the British champion, my brain just went, "It's not European." When I became the European champion, my brain just went, "It's not world." When I became Youth Olympic champion, it went, "It's not the Olympics." When I won a bronze medal, it was, "Well, you fell off, you didn't deserve the medal. Okay, let's go for a gold next time." When I didn't get to the next team, it was like, "Well, you're never going to be an Olympic champion." "Oh, well, your life's done." And that's the big mistake I made, and that's the mistake me and Sergei made. And the funny thing, the mistake that coaches make, particularly personal coaches, is this one. They sometimes make incredible sacrifices for their athletes, and they will sacrifice marriages, relationships, friendships, relationships with their children. They'll be in the gym every evening and every weekend. And the reality is, you're not going to be on the floor at the Olympic Games, the national coaches. So that is a big risk to take if you're going to put all your eggs in that one basket. And that will destroy 2 lives, not one. you know? So yeah, I saw that, and that's why I decided that for me, coaching in the traditional sense wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't see many marriages survive that, and it just wasn't for me. I wanted to spend as much time with my little boy and my partner as I possibly could. And that's why I kind of built my life around, coaching recreational gymnastics at the very bottom and every now and then dipping my toe in the top. And the reality is that the middle bit, that's the hard bit. You could give me a talented gymnast at 15 and I'll look like a genius within half an hour. I'll give them so many cheat codes and shortcuts, you'd look at me and think I'm Uchimura's coach. But the hard bit is teaching that kid a handstand from scratch, day in, day out, when no one's looking. The personal coaches do the hard yards, but it's not so that they can be in front of the camera. It's the athlete. The athlete has to walk up and do that routine at the end of the day. No one can do it for you. So, that's kind of all my advice for all of my friends that are coaches. And I think that hard conversation that I had with Sergei, he cried his eyes out and he said, "Thank you for telling me. I won't make that mistake again. I won't do it again,"
This is what you want. He wasn't defensive. He took it in. Like, that's a testament to his respect for you, but also to him as a person, because so many coaches would just get mad, and he showed you his feelings, which is also huge. Like, that's so amazing. And that you had the courage to tell him too, and that he listened.
Yeah, we had our relationship was so unique, Sergei's such an incredible human. Like, when I found out 10 years after meeting him that he had a son. I never knew he had a son. And he's estranged from his son. They don't have a relationship. And I asked him once about his son, and he said, "One day when you retire, I'll tell you about my son, but not now. I'm not going to talk about it." And so I realized, looking back, I filled the whole of his son. I was his son. And I spent more time with him than I did my parents. He used to drive me to Lilleshall there and back every week. I was the kid that Sergei, because he's such a workaholic, he would be at every single camp, everyone, the junior, the senior, the B squad, the coaching courses, and I'd go with him and I'd be there all the time. And I loved it because I loved gymnastics. I just wanted to do it all the time. And we spent so much time together, so much so that we'd come in and I'd be like, "Sergei, I had a dream." And he'd go, "I had the same dream." And so we'd figured the skill out, and we'd both dreamed about how we were going to get that skill right the next day, because we would spend so much time together. And he became like my second father. But we had that tough conversation, and we had tough conversations many times. I don't think you'll mind me saying this, but there was a competition once where, he didn't get to see his friends very often. And I had a lot of pressure on my shoulders, like a lot. And I knew that I had to win a World Cup medal to keep at this level of funding that I was on. And he got to see all of his friends from around the world, and he got drunk. And the next day he came in and he was like green in the face. And I did the competition and I hit the best routine I could. And I finished 4th or 5th, I think. And I missed out, didn't get the medal. And I said, "You ever do that again, we're done. Never again." And that goes both ways. I did it too. I made that mistake too. But he never did it again. He said, "I'll never do that again." And it was just a mutual respect. We had a great relationship. I'd do anything for him, and he'd do anything for me as well. I remember when I trained at Loughborough University, there was a gymnast. His relationship with his coach, they were from the Soviet Union. It was pretty they'd go back and forth and just scream at each other every day. I didn't get it. I was like, why are they doing this? This must be horrible for them both, And I'm sure it was a lot of pain and the situation they'd come from and where they were in. But one day he got really angry and quite aggressive, this gymnast, and he went to throw his handguards at. He just went to throw them at the floor, and the Velcro kind of spun around, and it went just past my head. And Sergei got up out of nowhere and took him right out the gym and told him, "You never, ever do that again." And I was like, whoa, this guy really, he's going to protect me no matter what. And just a great human being. And look, he really isn't a perfect human and made a lot of mistakes along the way. But when I go and see him coach now, I smile because I'm like, oh, he's learned so much. He coaches completely differently to the way that he used to. So yeah, pretty cool.
I love that story because I remember, one of the reasons that when Michaela Maroney came on the show and she asked for the interview and she was like, "Yeah, I finally want to talk about this," because I knew her coaches were incredibly abusive. should have probably, I mean, like to the level that Child Protective Services should have been called to go to the gym. She, I asked her straight up, like, how are your coaches going to feel about this? And what are they going to think that you're telling people all this stuff? Like, have you had a one-on-one conversation? And she was like, I have tried over and over and over. And they don't listen. Like, they could not hear what she was saying. You know what I mean? They couldn't take it in. And so the consequence of that is she was like, she felt like she had to do that not just for herself, to protect all of her teammates and all of her the future gymnasts that would be coached there and the past ones, because she had seen all the stuff that had happened. It wasn't just her. And, she didn't tell other people's stories, but it was something she took on. It wasn't just about her, because she had tried to have those conversations. And I think it's different people. I think I listened to this podcast with this comedian, and she interviewed Jane Fonda, who's like this famous actress and activist. And she was like, one of the things Jane Fonda said, and this podcast called something like "Listen to Old Women" or like "Learn from Old Women" or something like that. And Jane Fonda was like, I wish someone had told me when I was young, like, it is so hard being young. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to make mistakes. It is so hard to be 16 to 25 to 28, whatever. It's such a hard time in life. And on top of, so then I think about what she said, and then I times that by, you're trying to do one of the hardest things in the entire world. Being an Olympian in any sport, or being an elite level in any sport, is so insanely hard. It's so taxing on your family relationships, your relationship, your life, your body, your mental health, all of it. It's so hard. And on top of that, being young, it's so, so difficult. And it's just, I wish there was a way that, they say like, wisdom is wasted, or, you don't have wisdom when you're young, it's wasted on the old, whatever. And I just wish there was a way to impart those lessons. And I think that's one of the things about why both of us have started these podcasts, right? Is that we're like, one of the impetuses for me was like, how do we tell people ahead of time, look out for this shit, it's going to be bad. Here's how to have a conversation. Yeah, it can be really damaging. So you can have a real conversation about it, and then you can either hear it or you might not be able to. And I understand that too, as a person who I would not have been able to hear and take the lessons in when I was, 20 and I needed coaching, or I was going to be homeless. Like, I could not lose a job. Like, I could not, everything was like defensive. I have to act like I know what I'm doing because like I need this job to live. Like, I couldn't take it in. And now, it takes a lot of security and wisdom and all of that stuff to do it. And I feel like we have to also give people the grace to change, which is one of the things that bothers me so much about the cancel culture of it all. Is like, if someone makes a mistake, and I'm not talking about choking gymnasts or beating them. No, you don't get a second chance. You don't get to work with kids again. I'm talking about the little things that add up. We have to give people a chance to learn and be educated and take it in. Like, that's what we want as a human society. We want people to grow and learn. So we have to give people grace to do that and hope that they do change. And I think that what you're doing with your show is so great, because I have learned so much from it. And I think you're like passing on that wisdom from, the other generations, and hopefully the parents learn from it and the coaches learn from it. And I think it's just such an important job of the storyteller.
And if you ever have a situation where there's someone that's older that you feel like, oh my gosh, come on, like, why did they do that? Just remember that they were a baby once, and they were a blank canvas too. And then you go, oh, all right, life has happened to them, and that makes it easier, I think. Just trying to give people the benefit of the doubt and live that way is just a smart thing to do, I think. The way to operate, operate from a place of a lot of gratitude for the things that you do have, and being strong enough to call things out if you don't agree with them is an important thing to do, right? Like, not everybody's got a voice. That was why the podcast was so important for me. I learned how important it was to be in control of your own narrative. And once I figured that out, I was like, oh, okay, right. Brilliant. And that's helpful from a professional point of view as well, right? Like whatever happens now in any work that I go into, I always have this thing that we do and no one has control over. We can talk about what we want, say what we want. Nobody's pressuring me. And if they do, then you just say, no, thank you. And that's quite important. That's probably comes from not having that. I'm sure that's where that comes from, you know. But yeah, thank you so much for having me on. And I'm trying to like educate myself more on women's gymnastics now. Like growing up, I loved international women's gymnastics, and I watched it just as much as I did men's. And actually, when I was a lot younger, my a previous partner was a female gymnast. She was a double Olympian, and she was like, "You know more about women's gymnastics than I do." And I was like, "Yeah, that's because I'm such a geek. I watch so much women's gymnastics." But I'm trying to understand the women's college system a bit more because, you know, I'm going around the houses all the time and why can't men's gymnastics? Like, what is it about men's gymnastics? And I'm like, well, the women's college system is doing something right. So like, what is that? Let's figure that out. Let's actually learn and educate myself. I just interviewed Justin Spring actually this week.
Oh, he's so great to talk about that.
Yeah, he said some things that I didn't know, you know. He has a unique perspective coming from men's gymnastics.
Yeah.
That I had never thought about. And
like what? What did he tell you that you hadn't thought about
Well,
before?
one thing that I'd never contemplated was that he was like, I think there should be no rule group. There should be no skill categories in gymnastics. The gymnast should just do their 8 best skills. And I was like, I've never even thought about that. He was like, so if you've got really bad shoulders like me and you can't do a squat half, you just do 8 releases. It's the best 8 releases you can do. And then you really play to people's strengths. He was saying there's too many constraints. That's why everything looks the same. Because we were talking about how at the Olympic Games, the 8 routines in the final, everybody just finds the path of least resistance and ends up with the same
compulsory
routine.
Code hacking. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, oh my gosh, I've never even thought about it. I was like, that's genius. That would be amazing. It'd make it so interesting. You see unique skills, you get artistry. And then when I asked about women's gymnastics, he said it's 2 things. It's just 2 things. It's simple. College gymnastics is simple.
Simple.
The audience understands the perfect 10 and they can follow the journey. And he said it's a performance and a show. And men's gymnastics is like chemistry. It's not that. And it's a 3-hour competition. And if you want to fix it, that's how you got to fix it. But it's hard because people want to push back on that, you know, the traditionalists. And I understand that. I get that. I'm just always going to come from the athlete's point of view. And I want the athletes that, you know, are exceptional at what they're doing, sacrifice so much to get paid for it. I want them to get paid. You know, when they if you retire at 20, I retired, right? And I was a lucky one that made it to the Olympics. So many of my friends did just the same amount of training and they just missed out. And when they retired, they had no money, no degree, no career. And that it was frightening when I retired. It must have been even more frightening when they faced retirement. Because every athlete has it in their head. What happens is you watch the people before you retire and just be kicked to the wayside, and somewhere inside of you, and it will be a defense mechanism, you go, but that not me though, because they like me and it's me, right? And then it happens to you and you go, ah, shit, I was just the same. It happens to everyone, right? And you know, that for me, I want the athletes to make as much as they can. I've got an accountant coming on next week, and he's the accountant for a lot of the Olympians in the UK, and we're going to talk about athlete finances because one of my thing I'm kind of on at the minute is that when you get put onto like the British team or you're in an Olympic sport and you get funding, there's no pension. You don't get a pension. So you retire at 30 with no pension. And our peers, so friends that are our age that maybe have been in the workforce since they were 18, might have 10 years of a pension pot built up. And you retire as nothing as an athlete. And so I've got my accountant coming in and we're going over like athlete finances. And, you know, I'm going to ask him, what would you do if you had a child and they were a talented athlete? How would you financially approach their career? What are the big mistakes that people make? Talk to me about agents and management and, you know, the big things that you've seen over your experience. So the important things, you know, for athletes. And yeah, it's all about that. All I do is I'm trying to give value to the athletes. You know, it's just a megaphone to try and help them. But gymnastics, men's gymnastics is niche. It's so niche. And what's unique about men's gymnastics, I guess, is that, it's one of the only sports gymnastics that I would argue that more people follow women's gymnastics than they do men's by a huge amount. What's great about that is that we can then learn from that. It gives us, as male gymnasts, a unique perspective, and it's something that I hope that I can grow. And I think the best way to do that is if we can encourage this collaboration a bit more. We're in a situation where we need to piggyback off what you guys do in many ways, and so that arrogance needs to go away before we can do that, and like, okay, right, why do people love women's gymnastics so much? What can we do as young men to, build the sport in a way so we've got such a big following as women's gymnastics?
Yeah, it's been, I love Justin's perspective on it, because he is like, he tried so hard for so many years to get the arrogance to go, and for people to see, like, you're going to kill this sport. It's not going to be an NCAA sport, men's gymnastics, anymore. And people are so arrogant. And the thing that I talked to him about is, like, the men's gymnastics didn't have to work for what they have, so they take it for granted. And that might sound like a total dick thing to say, but women's gymnastics, there was nothing that made that, like, it was, all women had to fight to even be included in NCAA sports. They weren't even included in the NCAA as a championship sport until like the 80s. And then they didn't have any funding. And they only got included because there was a law that passed that said, oh, you have to give equal opportunity. You have equal men and women in this paying to go to university. You have to represent them equally in the sports that you provide. And so you can't have 90% men's sports when there's 60% women at the school. And so it's because of that law. And then women had to work so hard. Those original coaches had to work so hard and put so much into, like, educating people, getting people there. And that took years and years and years, like 30 years of constant marketing to get it where it is. And the men's gymnastics are just like, this job's easy. I don't have to do anything extra. And they're not all like that. But, like, when I've talked to the men's coaches, except for Justin, the attitude has just been so disappointing. So they're not fighting enough to make it huge. They're just staying even. And, like, well, I have a lot of coaching to do. That's a full-time job. No, the head coaches in women's gymnastics and NCAA, their 90% of their job is like fundraising and marketing. And then they also coach. It is not a 4-hour-a-day job. And if they're doing that, their program's never going to grow. It's going to stay the same. And, like, that is also like the American hustle of it, that's very much ingrained in women's gymnastics. And there's a lot of problems with the American hustle, but that has, it works if you put it in these ways. But it's so interesting that the FIG has now sent an envoy to come to the US and study women's gymnastics.
Oh, wow.
So that they have been to a couple meets to see. And
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think they understand, like, there is a huge growth here. And if there's a pro league here, then it's going to be in competition. If it comes from NCAA gymnastics, it's going to be in competition with the FIG World Cup circuit. So, like, what can we learn? But you should totally come to some NCAA meets because
I'd love to, yeah.
They're amazing and they're fascinating. And, like, going to, like, Alabama, Utah, it's the legacy programs that have it dialed in. I mean, there's never a boring moment, and it's over your maximum. Maybe you're there 2 hours, usually hour and a half, in and out.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Yeah, I'd love that.
Yeah. Thanks so much to Sam for his time and being here and confirming the Japanese Spy Network. This is my favorite thing ever that's happened. Please remember to get your live show replay tickets, and remember our Refer a Friend program is running right now. So you can send an email to customer service at gymcastic.com, refer a friend, tell us who it is, and we will give you a free month and your friend a free month. So you can check out GymCastic, get all of the perks, the behind the scenes episodes, etc. And we will see you for our return behind the scenes, our live Q&A podcast. You can send in questions at gymcastic@gmail.com or put them in the forum. Behind the scenes, Friday, noon Pacific. I'll tell all my stories from my trip to Boston. What's new in college graduation ceremonies. So until then, remember to take off on gay, split on rights. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on Friday.